My name is Rhiane Partridge. So I own Gold Coast Equine Clinic here on the sunny Gold Coast. I've been an equine vet for nearly 17 years now. Majority of that time purely in equine practice, equally between the UK and in the most recent last 8 years in Australia. So we see a variety of horses. So our client demographic, we see race horses through to performance horses through to pleasure horses. And those horses all have their different things that they come to us with. And in terms of wounds, we see wounds at different stages of healing. From the very fresh wounds that have literally just taken place to wounds that are multiple days old that maybe the owners haven't noticed or the horse they've tried to treat themselves. So we do see wounds at varying different stages of healing. And so our recommendation will change depending on where we're at. Some wounds in horses can be repaired, if they're fresh enough at the time, then we will repair them and go for a primary intention healing, as in we're suturing the wounds together. But a lot of horse wounds that we see, sometimes that's not possible. It's not possible for financial reasons to get a good enough heel, and we know it's going to break down because of movement and confinement issues. Other reasons would be where we are essentially finding that we are seeing wounds later down the line and then we're not able to repair them by first intention, so we're having to go for the secondary intention route, which essentially means the body heals the wound itself over a longer period of time, and thus we need to be supporting that healing process as much as possible. I've used Manuka honey as a primary aid for wound healing in horses for well in excess of probably 12 years. And I really love it as a product. I think it's got very, very good application in that particular use in horses for a number of reasons. Obviously, we know it has very good natural antibacterial, anti-inflammatory, antioxidant properties that we don't necessarily see the same as in normal honey. And we've also got the added benefit with Manuka honey, whereas we have a slightly lower pH, which is also very helpful in wound healing. In horses, we have a lot of issues with exuberant granulation tissue. So that's basically a lot of wounds in horses are on the legs because they get caught in fencing or otherwise. And that part of the body very commonly lays down excessive healing tissue, which everybody knows as proud flesh, where it becomes over the top in terms of the healing response. And I find Manuka honey is really great at, first of all, getting a really nice, healthy granulation bed, and then slowing down the development of that granulation tissue. So yeah, we use it a lot in clinical practice, and I find that it's really good at what it does. So I started using Manuka honey back when I was working in the UK. There was a really a large group that was looking at wound healing because, as I said, it's a big problem in horses where we see wounds that are a little bit older or purely that we just can't repair them by suturing. And so I started using it back then and have continued to use it very much regularly in day-to-day practice because we see a lot of wounds in horse practice in various locations. And so we've used it in a huge variety of different wounds. And I can think of one horse that particularly came to mind, which had a really nasty wound. It was in the Northern Rivers, actually, on its left hind stifle area, an area that we couldn't pull back together. And it was actually quite difficult to even apply things and keep the leg covered because it was the top part of the leg and bandages often move. And so that one I think springs to mind, particularly because we really were limited with what we could do to support healing, because most wounds we would purely be bandaging them and then obviously applying the honey. We use a lot for that, but in this circumstance we actually ended up just applying Manuka honey liberally to the wound on a daily basis. Yes, the horse was kept confined to a point so that we weren't getting that extra movement within the wound, which we know slows healing. But yeah, the Manuka honey worked really, really well, and that was a really big wound just proximal to a stifle. I think it probably took us about 2 to 3 months But it was also the quality of the healing in that area was really great, because you're always worried about a lot of scar tissue. And this pony went back, was within less than 6 months, was back in ridden work and really with minimal scarring at the site. And that was purely through application of the Manuka honey with not even any bandage over the top. And we were really lucky with not a lot of proud flesh in that location. I think that there's probably things that I could potentially be considering using it for that I don't. Like, my experience with it has always been around wounds. I know the clinical benefits of it in wounds. I've seen the proofs in the pudding. I've seen it work many, many, many times over the years. And so there are potentially other applications that even I should possibly be looking at in terms of benefits around gut health and all of those other things, which I think in horses we're probably not even considering as much as we should. And so I think it's really, if anything, when it comes to alternative type products, we know that they have their place. Certain products work better, obviously, for different horses, for different situations. And I think it's just consulting your vet and having a chat. And, you know, hopefully then people being open to trying things. But I think with things like Manuka honey, it sits in a different category to some of your other, you know, alternative products where there's not as much clinical evidence. There is a lot of clinical evidence with Manuka honey and wound healing that it is really very effective. Yeah, so essentially I started using the Manuka honey when I was working in the UK. There was a sort of, I suppose, a focus group around wound healing based out of, I think it was in association with the University of Liverpool, and a very well-renowned vet called Professor Derek Nottenbeld, who has been heavily involved in just skin conditions in horses. He's written textbooks on dermatology, and he was focusing on, just wound repair and various things that could be utilised to promote wound healing in horses. And Manuka honey was one of the things that they looked at quite heavily in those research studies. So following on from obviously that work, and then with a lot of, unfortunately in veterinary practice, we don't get the top tier of clinical trial stuff that happens in humans. It just pretty much doesn't exist. Randomized control trials, they just don't have the number or the investment to be able to do that. So a lot of the stuff that we have to do, we obviously use the evidence base that's available to us, but we also then have to go with clinical experience and peer experience and everything else. So that was when we started using it a lot, and I've just continued to use it because, as I said, I see the visible results myself. So with the cases that I'm dealing with. So I think with the Manuka honey, like, under my understanding is obviously you have a factor rating on the honey that basically is telling you, you know, in terms of the strength from a medicinal purpose. So we try and encourage, we do supply some medical grade honeys, but those are where we're potentially wanting to apply them in a more sterile manner. I think in terms of the majority of uses that we are taking the honey for, just a really good Manuka factor is going to be the key thing, and obviously making sure that it is Manuka honey over, because we know that there obviously are additional benefits from specifically the Manuka honey over other honeys. So a lot of the time they'll be purchasing them from chemists or online, etc. And the main thing is that when we will obviously, if we're using it in wound healing, we'll be demonstrating to them the application process of the honey, because the great thing is you don't need huge volumes of it. So although everybody goes, Manuka honey is quite expensive, you're not using large volumes of the honey. So compared to a lot of other topical medical applications, whether it would be an antibiotic-based cream or equivalent, actually use for use, it's very cost comparative.